You're about to listen to Julie in Genderland. Some of the names and voices you'll hear have been changed to protect the parents who spoke to us and their children. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like, and share. Something utterly mad has been done to children and their families over the last 10 years. Bad, sad, and definitely mad.
So the therapist came in to see us and she said, I'm going to have to refer to social services for unintentional emotional abuse.
For not affirming.
Just for not using he, him.
The social worker is standing at the foot of our stairs with our daughter next to us, and she points her finger at each of us in turn and says, "This is a boy."
And she said, we know you're a close, loving family, but I have to do this.
She put her hand on her heart and said, I feel it in here.
I feel it in here, she said.
I have to do it.
In homes, schools, hospitals, counselling rooms, parents have been threatened, shunned, and driven to despair by the people and authorities they used to trust.
We've got an example recently of a refugee child who cannot write her own name in English yet, but came home with the teacher in the primary school having asked her if she thought her trauma was actually because she was born in the wrong body.
My name is Julie Bindel. I'm a feminist. For 40 years I've been campaigning on the issue of men's violence against women and girls. Now, a new threat has arrived in the form of extreme transgender ideology, which says anyone can change sex, and men are women if they say they are. And somewhere along the line, children have been caught up in this insanity.
I saw so many videos that they all merged into one, so I'm not really sure what I saw, but I do know now that kids don't need that anymore to be indoctrinated because my school is full of it.
In this podcast, I'm meeting the children and parents whose lives have been thrown into turmoil by the abject failure of pretty much every democratic institution to stand up against this ideology. We'll be looking at what's been going on in schools, local authorities, hospitals and clinics, and asking, what now, following the change of government and the landmark Cass report, which blew apart the scandal of an unwarranted and dangerous social and medical experiment on children.
The minority of those children who were referred to endocrinology and then prescribed puberty blockers and or hormones were non-verbal, were living in care, were being groomed and having sex with middle-aged men, were being raped by a family member. So I don't want to be a scaremonger, but I think something did go very wrong.
Welcome to Julie in Genderland. Let's meet Graham and Anne.
She did a massive deep dive into our family history. We talked about it for weeks.
The couple were relieved when they were offered family therapy. Two of their daughters have diagnoses of autism and both developed trans identities as they went through puberty.
We got this whole big family tree and we talked about who had this mental health issue and who did what and who.
And
we were so in depth.
We were completely open with her. Like all parents, we had taken so much time to pick their names in the first place, and they call it a dead name instead of a birth name.
I know,
and it's just
so
one of these
ugly.
very little psychological tactics, because a lot of this, we've discovered, is designed to separate off parents from having involvement in it. And if the parents don't affirm, then you must get rid of them, you must cut off contact. And there's lots of little things designed to specifically to cause pain to parents. So calling it a dead name is just unnecessarily horrible.
We'd had a really positive experience with a social worker back in 2019.
Adam and Abigail also welcomed outside help when their autistic daughter declared herself a boy.
So we actually thought this would be a good thing. If we're going to have that intervention again, this would be really helpful.
If you welcome the intervention of a social worker, things are very, very desperate.
Yeah, completely. You know, you're at your wit's end. We had constantly, for at least 5 years, constantly be going to our GP, to the school, to say things are not sustainable. So the social worker comes and she is late. I remember that because it annoyed me. But she then interviewed us for a couple of hours as the parents, and we had on the table the ring binders which we'd kept. We'd printed off every email exchange between us and the school, us and the GP, us and social services for 5 years. So it was a whole big file. All the autistic risk assessments, the psychiatric assessments, the counselling assessments. So it's just like a whole gamut, a library of stuff on the table. And then there was about half an hour, 40 minutes, no more than that, where our daughter was on her own with the social worker in our dining room, and we all went upstairs.
So whilst we were in these sessions with this girl doing family therapy, which we kept expecting them to bring our children into to sort out communication and work with us, she was having sessions with our eldest. And one day during the session, she said that she was going to have to send us to social services. She was going to have to report us to social services. And we were like, what? Why? And it turned out that all these conversations that our eldest was having with her, she was telling her all this stuff that we knew nothing about. So basically, she had decided that she wanted to be a he, him. She hadn't told us about it.
So the therapist came in to see us and she said, I'm going to have to refer to social services for unintentional emotional abuse.
For not affirming.
Just for not using he, him. And she said, we know you're a close, loving family, but I have to do this.
She put her hand on her heart and said, I feel it in here.
I feel it in here, she said.
I have to do it.
And literally, the only reason for it, and she spelled it out to us, was for not using he, him, which our eldest had never actually asked us to use either. But that was the only reason. We were scunnered.
Adam and Abigail.
We go down the stairs and the social worker is standing at the foot of our stairs with our daughter next to us, and she points her finger at each of us in turn, including our son, each of us in turn, and says, "This is a boy," and points at our daughter and gives the new name for our daughter. There must be. You will all have to, that's it, you will all have to make changes to accommodate what he needs. And then turned around and gave her mobile phone number to our daughter and said, if you don't like what these people do, you just call me.
Yeah, and at that point, I knew she became unparentable, because we, parenting at whatever age, you should be allowed to set boundaries. And that was actually completely undermined by the social worker. And effectively, the social worker was saying, I have authority over you, like us, as parents. If the parents tell you something that you don't want to hear, you just come to me, which effectively meant we couldn't parent from that moment on. I won't lie, I felt suicidal at that point. I wanted to just get in the car and drive off Beachy Head, because at that point I'd had enough. I just thought there was no way that family life could continue. It was desperate.
This is a horrible situation for a parent to be in.
Maggie Mellon is an independent social worker who qualified in the 1970s.
Because it actually stops you parenting your child properly. It stops you having the necessary, and when I say authority, I mean good authority. You need authority as a parent to, tell your child, no, that's wrong, and no, mummy says this, or it's bedtime, or whatever it is. If you have people that come into your house or into wherever, into your family, and tell you and tell your parents in front of you that they're wrong and that they have the power, that person has the power to challenge and to undermine the parent and even to take you away, that is like the most awful thing that you can do to a parent. And it happens far too much.
She just left the family in that mess, blew apart any kind of parenting relationship completely validated this obsession, this idea that because she said she was a boy, she was a boy. And if you didn't go along with it, we were the safeguarding risk.
And the other thing she did, which I find despicable, is that for our other child, all trust in authority was just erased in that minute, right? It's gone because they have, at 12 years old, talked about their life and what they need, which was just ignored. So we made arrangements for our daughter to stay with some family members for a few days, and she was due to be dropped back off at 7:30 that evening. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, an email popped up from those relatives, and in the title of the email it said, "Social Services have asked us to keep her."
So when this gender identity bandwagon rolled into town, I mean, I've always been a feminist. I thought that we dealt with all the arguments about sexism and sexist stereotype, gender stereotypes, and that was a done deal. And so I couldn't believe it when this nonsense started being brought it, like accepted as, like, you know, that you could be a boy in a girl's body or a girl in a boy's body. Just how mad it was. And obviously there's huge safeguarding issues. I came across the case of a young woman who had been transitioned in care and was very unhappy because, like all of these children, enormous other problems, not least that she'd been separated from her mother for years and kind of, you know, lost in care, feeling absolutely awful, low self-esteem, confusion, all this. Anyway, she had been persuaded that the cause of her problem was she was in the wrong sex. She was actually lesbian, young lesbian. She was, you know, old enough to know what she was. But then that was changed for her. But because she was miserable and she started running away, what's called absconding, they told the police that it was a missing boy, which meant that when she was found, she was roughly searched as a boy, they were looking for blades or things that she could hurt herself with, but they touched her breasts. I think they touched between her legs, looking for, you see what I mean? So I said to the social worker when I found this out, my God, you have caused harm to this child. So she said, oh, you don't need to worry. The police knew that he was transgender. So what do you make of that madness? But it was my experience of a social worker failing to recognise that, you know, the transition carries huge risks. Before I was aware that social work had been completely, or seemed to have been completely captured by this, I was really surprised to read an article in Professional Social Work, which is the British Association of Social Workers magazine, written by a social worker who said, transitioning children is not the child protection issue. What is a child protection issue is a parent who refuses to transition their child. So I thought, well, God, that's deranged. This is terrible. Wrote a response, which wasn't published. This then became a thing in social work that parents could be referred, and actually the trans activists and, you know, all managed to get the policy people in local authorities to start adopting this as policy, to respond to consultations saying, yes, this should be policy, that parents who won't transition their children are subject to child protection measures. This is a child protection concern. They are exposing their children to emotional abuse. And I do know that families have been threatened with this. I also know that some very sensible social workers and some very social, you know, have just said, listen to parents, had they referral from the school or wherever, and just said, no, we don't have concerns. There's no concerns. This is a caring parent. But, you know, there are far too many social workers who actually would accept that and would not object in any way, or would be too afraid to say, no, this is wrong.
It's so bizarre because you think about the core tenets of therapy, of medicine, you know, you think about the Hippocratic Oath and not wanting to do harm.
James Esses is the co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists. which is challenging the ideological capture of the mental health professions.
If you've already decided that you are going to affirm that, yes, if they wanted to have surgery and irreversible hormones, that they should do that, you're going in with a predetermined outcome. It's bizarre. We don't treat any other mental health condition like this. And I always come back to this point, and I sound like a broken record, but gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. Anorexia, body dysmorphia. If a client came into a therapist and said, I feel so obese and ugly, the therapist is not going to turn around and say, well, if that's how you feel, then yes, you are obese and you are frightfully ugly. And yes, you should have liposuction.
Because of his stance, James was expelled from his master's degree in psychotherapy, as he told me in an interview last year.
The Deputy Chief Executive Officer emails me out of the blue and says, we've received some complaints, although they never told me what the complaints were, and could I meet with them to have a discussion about what I'd been speaking about on social media. And I responded to that email quite shocked, and I said, I'm not sure what I've done to bring about complaints, and I expressed a bit of anxiety around that, but I said, of course, I'll meet with you. And the response came the same day, there's absolutely nothing to be worried about. We don't want you to feel anxious at all. This is just an informal chat, were their words. So I said, fair enough, I'm going to take them at their word. Fast forward 24 hours to the Thursday, and then in the middle of the day, I see a notification on my laptop, and up pops the Deputy Chief Executive Officer's name, and the subject line says termination of contract. And this was a 2-paragraph email in which I was told that because I brought the institution and my profession into disrepute, that I was being expelled with immediate effect.
What on earth did you do?
Well, my first response was shock and disbelief. I thought they must have made a mistake. They must have the wrong person. So immediately I went to respond to the email to say, you must have made a mistake. And I discovered that they had blocked my email address. They had deleted my university email address, so I couldn't even respond to the email. This is within minutes of me receiving it. That's when I knew that this was real. And basically, and I'm very thankful and lucky that I had both my girlfriend at the time and also my family. We were all at my mother's home together. I basically crumbled. I mean, I was in an absolute state. I was inconsolable, and I mean, my life as I knew it basically was over. I'd actually just been signed off by my institution about 2 or 3 weeks beforehand to set up a private practice where I could start seeing clients privately and start to earn some of the money back that I paid on the course. So, you know, my life, as far as I was concerned, was set out and had a pathway, and in a single email that went up in flames.
I mean, you must have felt like everything had just... You'd lost everything in that moment.
Yeah, and I'm not usually one for raw emotion, but I was in a literal heap on the floor in floods of tears. My family and my girlfriend were very concerned about me. I mean, they hadn't seen me in that kind of state before. I couldn't really see a way out, and it was the combination of, you know, this wasn't being cancelled or expelled from a course because I couldn't keep up with it. You know, it was beyond my grasp, or I had failed some essays. This was because I had dared to raise concerns about children's welfare and well-being, and to be effectively punished for that was awful. And then the worst thing was that evening, I just had a feeling, and at this stage I wasn't even as active as I am these days on social media, but I had a feeling that I needed to go and check my institution's Twitter account. So I just went onto it. It was the first time I'd ever been on their Twitter, I think, from memory, and I saw that the same day that they'd expelled me, they'd published a tweet saying that they had expelled a student, which was very obviously me, because my name was doing the rounds on Twitter at that point. And so they state we've expelled a student, and then alongside that they put out what they termed a statement of solidarity with the LGBT community.
5,000 people crowdfunded £136,000 to help James take legal action. He eventually received an apology from the institute where he was studying. He also reached a settlement with the UK Council for Psychotherapy, which had been involved in what happened. Social workers, too, have faced sanction.
Very recently, one of our members was disciplined and warned for objecting to a child being named as the wrong sex and identified in the wrong sex.
Disciplined?
Yes, disciplined. So warned, given an official warning and taken off the case. There'd been a complaint against him by one of the other professionals involved that he was refusing to accept this child's sex being the opposite of what it was.
Graham and Anne had to explain to their daughter why they were in trouble with social services.
When we tried to speak to her about our eldest, she didn't realise the difficulties that we were put in by this referral. She thought it was just going to be for help.
And when we told her that the reason was unintentional emotional abuse, she was literally speechless. She's never speechless. It shocked her, absolutely shocked her, because that's not how she thought of her parents.
Yeah, and that's not how it was put to her either. I'm pretty sure that the therapist didn't say,
and
we're referring your parents for emotional abuse.
And when we said to the therapist at that meeting that, look, we wouldn't abuse our children. We don't say these things to her. She said,
I said I was open and honest with you because it was a therapy session, and I opened myself up and told you exactly how we were feeling. But I don't talk like that at home with the kids.
And
we're
the
very
therapist
careful.
said, we know how you think.
We know how you think. We all know. Something like that.
So it was basically
persecution.
Being reported for thought crime.
Yeah. When she referred us to social services, we had to carry on sending our eldest to her because we didn't have anywhere else for her to go at that point. So she had to keep...
You know what? No, because we were scared to stop it
Yeah.
in case that was used against us with social services.
That's the other reason. We wanted to get private sorted before we cancelled with CAMS, so they didn't have anything. They couldn't say, well, they stopped therapy.
Eventually, social services contacted us.
7 months later.
Was it that long?
Yeah.
Gosh. Had our chat with them. They were quite happy. They said all they were going to do was refer back to CAMS anyway, and they're happy to close the file. And if we want to contact them, if we need help, then we can. And that was that.
I can't believe they said they would send us back. All they would do was refer us to CAMS. Well, we just got referred from CAMS.
Adam and Abigail were also left in limbo after their encounter with social services.
So we didn't get hold of anybody at social services till 5 p.m. on the Monday. And when they spoke to my husband, the senior social worker said, of course, you're still legally parents and have parental responsibilities, but it's all rather unfortunate and difficult because of the irrational transphobia. And I will never forget or forgive this. They walked into our house and knowing that my husband had been kind of suicidal the week before, she comes into our house and she kind of points at my husband and she said, now you'll have to do what we tell you to do.
What kind of dystopian nightmare is this? And what needs to be done to move forward so that this is turned around, so that we live in reality?
Well, I mean, I think we're making some progress, and I and some other in Scotland have actually quietly mounted a discussion and a round table where we hope that the discussion can be had properly, and it's been received well. So I think people are ready to move, and it's a case of actually. The CAS report has been wonderful because it's actually given these people who maybe were afraid and maybe had tried but not been able to argue the case because they were met with the CAS review and all the evidence that's come out as a kind of firm foundation for anybody to stand on and not be browbeaten, or it means that questions must be asked, and questions are being asked.
What would be a good, decent, child protection focused response to a 12-year-old girl or boy, but let's say for the sake of argument now a girl who's gender non-conforming, who comes home from school and tells her parents she now wants to be called Kai, be known as a boy, and that school has said that they're with her on this and have already started using those male pronouns. Talk us through what that response should be.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the parents should be able to expect social workers to be allies to them in going into the school and saying, hang on a minute here, what have you been saying? What's your policy? What have you been saying? What have you been teaching? What's your policy? What's your evidence for this policy? In what way have you got authority to, so the social worker, I believe, should be championing the parents and their right to exercise their parental rights and responsibilities responsibly, and to ask questions and to protect their child. So I don't, so that would be one, if the parents came to you and said, oh my God, I don't think parents would do that because parents are afraid of social work and they don't, of local authority social work. As an independent social worker and one that works for a charity, my response would be to, go with the parents, advocate for them, demand, produce evidence to support their case, and ask the school to back off and stop, not, run over the parents' rights, etc. As a local authority social worker, that's what they should do as well. If the school approaches them and says, look, this parent has come in and complained and we think they're abusing their child, the response should always focus on evidence. What is the evidence for this approach? That should be the role of social work in standing up for families, standing up for children and their rights. That's how I would see it, but that's not, I understand what happens.
And now I want to ask about potential harm to the child of being allowed or encouraged to socially transition, because of course the narrative seems to be that this is something liberating. It's that child being able to live their true, authentic life and nothing but positive. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I long before Cass, even at the Cass review, I thought that was completely wrong, because you're encouraging a child to believe in something that's not true. It's bound to end in tears. It's bound to end in disappointment. It's bound to cause them enormous problems socially. Because, as Cass said, social transitioning is not a neutral act. It's not something that can be undone just because there's been no drugs involved or no surgery involved. What you've done, it's actually behavioral modification. This is what they're adopting, a strategy of behavioral modification without any justification, of a child actually trying to, and modifying the behavior of all the other children. Because I've always said there's two harms done. There's the harm done to that child by imposing this impossible identity on them, and the other harm is done to all the other children who are really being gaslighted by being told that what was a boy is now a girl, what was a girl is now a boy, and that they're very bad for refusing, if they refuse to accept that, and they should welcome it. And I mean, I've heard of children who've been told off severely by teachers and youth leaders for not accepting.
This is such a fast-moving space, and we've had some real legal victories. We've got, Charity Commission now investigating mermaids. We've got the Tavistock closing. Things are going in the right direction, but we need to keep speaking out about this. And I'm basically, although I have effectively been cancelled in a number of ways, I'm not going to shut up about this because it's too important.
Social services took no formal action against Graham and Anne, but the damage was done.
It's been absolutely catastrophic, because our whole bringing up with the children has been about closeness and love. That's environment, connection. That's the environment I grew up in, with a whole very close, very loving family, and it's really been attacked by this. And they've been told that literally, they have been told, if your parents don't go with it, then you should cut them out of your life. And they haven't done that, because they are still our loving children, and They are still close and loving to us, but there's a definite
Sort
gap.
of.
There's a definite gap.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I had a complete breakdown in 2020 when this all started, and I was very, very unwell. And I was still researching it all and trying to.
Well, that was part of the breakdown because you were
Yeah, it
researching
was just
so
so
obsessively.
much. I was like not sleeping. I was doing it 24/7. I was outside during lockdown around a fire the whole night, just obsessively trying to find that like that one little nugget that's going to help them desist. It's impossible.
The whole
And Scottish society does not help it
the
anymore.
family dynamic is
SNP that
damaged.
fucks it up.
Our trust in the authorities is damaged,
Yeah.
and our relationships with other families is damaged.
Adam and Abigail now have little contact with their daughter.
There's always this moment you just see this really vulnerable, pained, traumatised, complicated little girl. But that moment where I just think, how can these professionals look into that same face and think, what we're going to do is peddle this policy at you, rather than what we actually need to do is ensure that you are connected to your family, connected with others. Let's help you navigate some way through, because that to me is a form of abuse. That is a form of abuse. And I hope that she looks back on this period, and she will hate us for a long time, but I hope when she looks back on it, what she sees is a family that actually fought for her in the moment. And she might not have liked it, she might never be able to forgive us for it, but I hope she's able to see that we had her best interests at heart. And the other interest we have is siblings, and these are the forgotten people in these stories, the siblings. The same teachers, the same activist teachers, a year on at that school, have admonished him, shouted at him, told him, you have a brother, you do not have a sister, you are not allowed to say you have a sister. He believes he has a sister. It's his right to believe he has a sister. Who are they to be shouting at him in a French class or a geography class? So he has suffered untold abuse from other pupils, untold harm from teachers, from this situation that is literally ignored every day by every adult. That is also unforgivable.
It's mind-boggling sometimes. I get my head around how destroyed we are from it.
And how wrong it has been from the start, because it's not been based on proper evidence, and it's not been based on child safeguarding. The thing that
and every time something comes up about it, and I look at it and I get really upset that how could we not know this?
It's the huge failure in safeguarding, because the safeguarding principles we had were based on the hurt caused to other children. They didn't come about by magic. They're, like they say, written in blood. And all of these principles were just totally missed. And I cannot understand or forgive psychological guidance bodies for adopting it so quickly without reviewing the evidence behind it. And going along,
there wasn't any.
So many of them went along with this idea that parents can be excluded and secrets can be kept from parents who know their children, parents who love their children, and the idea that parents are the source of the harm and should be excluded from it. It just is absolutely unbelievable.
You've been listening to Julie in Genderland. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like, and share.